Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. Welcome back to Grid Connections, the podcast where we explore the intersection of clean energy, electric vehicles, and the evolving power grid. I'm your host, Chase, and in today's episode, we're joined by returning guests Loren McDonald, the Chief Data Analyst, and Bill Ferro, the CTO of Paren. We explore what they call Charging 2.0 and the new era of EV charging, where data, reliability, and customer experience are finally aligning with business reality. From Walmart's bold entrance into charging to the rise of rideshare utilization and the hard truth behind rural access, we unpack the latest quarter one insights from Paren's industry-leading EV charging data platform. We also dive into why reliability is improving, how rideshare drivers are reshaping demand, what's driving high urban utilization, and how the transition to J3400 or NACS is really playing out. If you're working electrification, policy, CPO operations, or just want to better understand the forces behind charging network evolution, this is a must-listen conversation. Before we get into that, though, I also wanted to share again the launch of Grid Connections Consulting, our new advisory service helping companies and communities navigate the electric vehicle transition with clarity and confidence. Also, if you found value in today's episode, share with one colleague or friend who should hear this as well, and leave us a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. Plus, sign up for our newsletter using the link in the show notes to stay ahead of the curve in clean transportation and energy. With that, enjoy. In the unlikely chance that anyone listening isn't familiar with what you guys do, can you just give a quick recap of Paren and what your team's kind of bringing to the market, and then we'll get into some of today's great topics.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'll tackle that as the co-founder, I guess. So what we're doing is working on building the largest EV charging data platform in the country, and then expand that across the globe. And we look at charging across many different aspects. So we look at it both infrastructure, pricing, reliability, utilization, all different kinds of aspects. And our customers are sort of driving and pushing us in a variety of different ways. Our eventual goal as a company is to be embedded in the driving experience and take our reliability data, take our pricing data, take some of the other data sets that we have to the driver experience so that no one has to ever visit a broken charger. Right? That's our ultimate goal. And as we work towards that, we're building out this data set that our customers find extremely helpful.
I think that sums it up perfectly. And yeah, that's about as good of an end goal as anyone can have in the industry right now with what we're seeing. I mean, obviously it's going in the right direction in general, but yeah, we got a few different things. I know you guys just had your quarterly kind of report on what you're seeing in the industry, and I think we can definitely get into that. But first, one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about was one of the things I know both of you guys have talked a lot about, and kind of came up at the EV Charging Summit recently that we were both, all three of us were at, around kind of like what you guys have come like charging 1.0 to charging 2.0. I think a lot of our listeners would find that really fascinating. So I don't know if Bill, Loren, if you both kind of want to give an idea of, or kind of synthesis of what this means to you guys, and then we can kind of get into what we're seeing in the industry right now with the state of charging.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and then Bill can add some color maybe to some of my points. And yeah, I mean, Bill and I have been using sort of the term charging 2.0 for actually probably a couple of years now, and then just with the report that we released, it's starting to take hold. Seeing a lot of articles using the term and stuff, but you know, the sort of the core idea is that, you know, for the first, 10, 12, 15 years of the industry, it was sort of driven by companies that were, either selling hardware, or their business model was, a land grab, and, what I call sort of not about making money, but about getting money, meaning incentives, whether it's federal, state, local, utility, et cetera, to offset the cost. And then cross your fingers and wait for the day when there was enough EVs on the road that you might actually break even. Unfortunately, sometimes the hardware actually fails by the time you would get to break even. And what's happened in the last couple of years is several things. One is that day has arrived of when there's enough EVs on the road. Like we are seeing, and we'll get into the data in a bit, but we're seeing like off the charts utilization rates in some of the large urban dense markets with a lot of rideshare drivers and apartment dwellers and stuff like that. And so it's actually become a business instead of a hope and a dream. And so that, one of the pivots, it's no longer about, the sort of the 1.0 was where can I get money, meaning incentives and things like that, to now it's, oh, where can I make money, right? So it's sort of because it's now sort of data driven, and there are markets where EV charging, fast charging is actually becoming a business instead of a hope and a dream. And then the second part of it, Chase, is the players are changing, right? Like we had initially, putting Tesla aside, Tesla's like the big asterisk, etc., because they've been doing charging 2.0 since day one, but everybody else has sort of been different. But the second piece of it is the players are different, right? We now have major automakers and retailers, everything from Iona, Mercedes, Rivian, GM in all their partnerships, to Walmart, to what the industry calls fuel and convenience players, right? The convenience store chains, the travel stops, and the oil companies. So you have everything from 7-Eleven, Circle K, Love's, Pilot, BP, Sheetz, Wawa, these companies. And the difference for them is why they're in the business, right? Like the pure play charging 1.0 players were in it to sell hardware or fees, or eventually hopefully to make money from utilization. Like the goal was to have it become a business. But for these 2.0 players, the automakers, it's to sell more EVs, right? I mean, they don't want to lose money, but their goal, just like Tesla and why Rivian got into this space, was they understood that we can't rely on the electric version of the gas station. It wasn't working, right? It was not a great experience, etc. So we had to enter the market, control that brand experience, that customer experience, and take it to another level. And then the retailers, whether it's the convenience store chains, the travel centers, and stuff like that, it's about incremental revenue, right? It's about our fueling revenue has probably peaked, especially in like markets like California, New York, and places like that where there's high EV adoption rate. So it's like, oh crap, our historical high volume fueling business is declining. EVs are the future, so we have to start building towards that. But secondly, all the executives at these companies woke up a couple years ago and went, oh my God, these people in EVs stop not for 5 minutes, but they stop for 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes. And if we can get them to go inside the store and spend, $15, $20 on a $5 latte that has like a $4 margin on it, right? Like, this is the business we know and understand, because they already made that transition when they went from being gas and service stations to convenience store chains that, oh, by the way, had gas pumps out front. So I know that was a lot. There's sort of more to it, but I'll stop there and let Bill sort of chime in.
Yeah, let me just add one more thing. I think the announcement last week of Walmart entering the space big time, right? And don't think for a second that this was a simple decision, right? They actually had the perfect platform to watch and see what their customers were doing with the existing partnership they have with Electrify America. And there doesn't seem to be any changes in that partnership, except they've now discovered and I'm sure measured down to the minute detail that they can make a lot more money by branding their own stations, having it as a more integrated experience between their Walmart app, the visitor coming in the store, again, for that dwell time for 15 to 20 minutes. Walmarts aren't always in the along the corridor, but they are in convenient places for folks to stop potentially on road trips or as a destination. I know on one of my road trips there's a Walmart at the end of it. That means that I don't have to be fully charged when I get to my destination because I know that it's there and I can charge if I want to. So I think that to me is a perfect example of what we call charging 2.0, right? CPOs, which look differently than CPOs looked 2 years ago, 5 years ago, getting into the space to provide a better experience, overall experience for their customers.
Yeah, and
driving sales.
Yeah, and really a lot of it, you think about, a company like Mercedes that's in the space, right? Mercedes has this incredible luxury brand, right? And if you're spending, $100,000 on an electric Mercedes, and you go to, a charging station in the back corner parking lot with no lights and no bathrooms and, next to the trash cans and stuff, like, that's not what your customers
Been
expect.
there. That's not a Mercedes experience.
Yeah, that's not a Mercedes.
Their motto is the best or nothing, and I can think of a lot of things that are much better than that.
Yeah, and so like every company has a slight different tweak to why they're entering, the charging business, but Mercedes is like probably right at the top. It's about controlling and delivering on a superior luxury brand experience. And, I was always, I had a chance a few years ago to spend a lot of time with executives at Lucid, both a couple times at their headquarters and down at the Casa Grande factory opening and stuff. And, I talked to them about partnering with Electrify America. No offense to anyone, but it was sort of like, it just didn't feel like giving up that control, if you will, to Electrify America was what I would want if I was buying a Lucid. Like, it just seemed like they were letting go of too much of that experience. Now, I'm not necessarily saying Lucid needed to go the Rivian Tesla route and Mercedes and build their own network, but it's like
there was definitely kind of a product fit and kind of experience fit that I think you're talking about that makes a lot of sense. And it surprised me that in some ways they didn't do that after pretty quickly seeing just what kind of the current state of that experience was. I'm kind of curious because you brought up a lot of interesting things with everything you said so far, but especially with kind of like the Walmart example. I know that they can be to some people maybe the bane of their EV road tripping experience, but what I think is really interesting, like talking about this 2.0 charging, to me what it really is more about is not necessarily the person who's on like an EV road trip, but like it addresses a lot of the multi-family home kind of experience where you're doing your weekly shopping or something else that you can kind of be in there for half an hour to an hour anyway, doing whatever you need, and then the car's charging during that. I mean, I've got to imagine that's probably a large part of these conversations that your team is having around that, about like trying to approach that from some of these new larger retailers that are entering the space.
Well, I think there's another thing about the Walmart that ties into kind of what's going on in the country today, right? With the pause on NEVI, we potentially have lost the government funding of charging stations where it may not be feasible, right, from a business standpoint. But when you look at the Walmart map and where the Walmarts are, they kind of fill some of those gaps that NEVI was trying to fill. So I think that does bring another interesting dynamic into the picture as far as a place where having an EV becomes a better solution if I have a reliable charging spot that I can pick from. So.
Yeah, I mean, Walmart's locations are sort of different around the country. Where I live out in the San Francisco Bay Area and stuff, we're more Target country than we are Walmart country, just because we're not like rural, for lack of a better term. I mean, there are some Walmarts in there. I mean, the closest one to where we live is like 15-20 miles away, et cetera. But I think so in sort of the more suburban environments where there are Walmarts, it's probably less solving the apartment market to some extent. But I think to Bill's point, like when I think about where a lot of the Walmarts have been to like where my parents lived up in the mountains and down in the Central Valley and things like that. It actually could have an impact on EV adoption to a market that is not necessarily inclined towards buying in EVs, right? If they start seeing like that Walmart is normalizing EVs by seeing these 8 fast chargers out front and things out in these sort of more rural areas, it's sort of like, stamp of approval, if you will. And so I think, in addition to your point about apartments, I think it could sort of democratize almost charging and make it seem sort of more normal out in the country. I mean, one of the things, there's a Midwest chain, a convenience store chain called Quick Trip that's getting into the charging business. They already have, Bill, three or four.
3 or 4 NEVI stations, right?
Yeah, NEVI stations open and stuff, and they're out in very sort of rural areas where the nearest Walmart is like 40, 50, 60 miles away. So they're solving the problem of people can go and buy all their groceries and stuff during the week, and then every 2 weeks they drive an hour away to the nearest regional Walmart to do their shopping for like the month or whatever it is, right? And so for those people, right, like knowing they can go to that Walmart and park and charge up and make it back, it's like that adds a sort of additional level of confidence that probably doesn't exist for people out in those more rural markets today.
Yeah, and I know one of the things we wanted to talk about today was around reliability improvements. And I think that's kind of an interesting point to kind of make that segue, because you're totally right. Like that, as you were talking about the stamp of approval for Walmart to have starting to EV chargers and some of these other larger, well-known brands, that I think one of the other things also that just stood out to me so much from the EV Charging Summit was how people were having the realization that so many of the issues that were solved by visibility of EV chargers and getting butts and seats to experience EVs a decade ago is still probably one of the best things we need to do as an industry right now. And that visibility of having it at a Walmart is such a big kind of impact, I think, for a lot of the country, like you're talking about, whether it be due to kind of location or just kind of exposure to electric vehicles. And we just see so many times, like if one person in a suburb or something, or in a cul-de-sac gets one, then you start seeing other people. Well, if you're in a place where maybe your neighbor's a mile down the road, kind of like where I grew up, that's probably a more rare occurrence. So I'm kind of curious, as we kind of talk about that, like, is the reason the companies are making this pivot finally into electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging, is that a big part? Is that due to the ability to buy reliable charging infrastructure? Is it business plan? Is it all of our business model? Is it just kind of all of the above that we're seeing with this change?
I would put it more in the all of the above category, right? I do think that we know that there's new players coming into the space, Kempower and Alpatronic specifically, with a really good track record in Europe, right? And that tells us that they can, it becomes then more of a sales issue. How do they get into the pipeline? And a couple of them have done a very good job of doing that. And so if we can start to bring that better hardware, more reliable hardware into the picture, then it becomes more about an experience, right? And so that's really, you look at what Ion is doing and ensuring that the driver experience is there. Walmart's the same way. Walmart has said their goal is to get to no farther than 200 feet from the door of the store, right? That puts them out front, not back, not in the back, not far away from the parking lot where the trees are, you're getting close to the road. That puts them close to where you park if you don't have an EV, and you might want to chat with somebody who pulls up with the latest Lucid Gravity, and you think that's a cool car and you want to know what it is. And so that's, again, another way to build the adoption. But it becomes about more about the capabilities and amenities at the specific locations and the experience that they're going to give the driver, and including the software experience, which I know that all of the new vendors are working so carefully on. I got invited. I'm missing that today for you, Chase. I got invited to another user experience test in my region, and it's something that they're constantly doing in order to make sure that the latest versions of software will work for experienced and non-experienced EV drivers.
And Chase, as Bill said, it's sort of all of the above. There's probably, a dozen reasons we're seeing reliability improve, and both gradually and significantly. And, one of them is as I mentioned, is that in many locations, it's actually becoming a business, right? So, before, if you spent, $800,000, $1 million to build a fast charging station, and you had 5% utilization, right? You weren't highly motivated to have, a more expensive, agreement with a hardware provider, maintenance contracts, have people, getting truck rolls out there within 24 hours. You're like, well, I'm going to build another station, to get the money, etc. But why do I care if a charger is broken when it's not even being used, And so when it started becoming actually economical and a viable business, then it's like, oh, if a charger or two are broken, we're actually losing money now because somebody can't charge, or they're going to a competitor. It's hurting our brand long term. They can't trust us. So it sort of went from the old days where people were just happy to find a charging station. Now there's competition. Now there's brand. Now there's expectations. There's choice. And so, we've talked to some of the executives at the hardware companies saying their customers are asking for and paying for higher levels of maintenance contracts and SLAs. That was the acronym I was blanking on. But yeah, they're seeing a pivot into actually paying for and expecting higher service level agreements and things like that. So we're seeing this sort of move up for people caring more about uptime and reliability and things like that. So I think that's a piece of it. And as Bill said, they're also we won't name names, but everybody knows who they are. There were some of the major charging networks sort of ran through several hardware players, and they were new. They tried them out, and some of them didn't work out so well. Some of the companies went bankrupt. Some of the companies exited the U.S. market, et cetera. So, now, there's enough players where people kind of know who produces a quality product, who stands behind it, et cetera. And so we're seeing, again, a few players starting to sort of dominate, if you will.
There was one more piece, if I could just add real quickly, that to our infrastructure data, which is that the average number of ports per station has gone up from like 3.2 to 3.7 or 3.9, right? And that is, I think, equally important from a reliability perspective. We know stuff happens, right? And so if one charger is not working, that's bad. If one of two is not working, that's not great. If one of 4, one of 6, one of 10 is not working, now you've got a better a shot at moving to a different stall or not waiting as long. And I think that's a big thing. And we're seeing that, again, it's one of our key features of Charging 2.0 vendors is they're putting in stations typically of 6 or more simultaneous vehicle charging capability.
Yeah, Chase, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's a great call out, but what were you going to add, Loren?
I was just going to add, I mean, the port to station ratio was something I started tracking, I don't know, about 8-9 years ago, something like that. And, the difference between Tesla and everybody else was crazy. It's still crazy, right? But back in the day, Tesla was averaging around 8 or 9, then moved up to 10. Now they're at about 13 ports per station, and everybody else was less than 2, right? And
Right.
again, we won't necessarily name names, but there's some well-known names in the industry, who are selling, you know, one low power fast charger to a restaurant owner, and putting in the back, or even convenience store chain, one out front, right, and then maybe some twos, right. And this Bill said the problem with that is, it's like if you have one charger and it's broken, right, you have no chargers, right? If you have 2 chargers and one, it's like there was this story that this woman who went on a road trip several years ago in a Chevy Bolt, and she planned like all these stops, and she would get to a location that had 2 chargers, and one of them would be full and the other would be broken, and she had 30 miles left, and the next nearest charging station was 40 miles away, right?
It creates such a bad experience, and then one person hears that story and they tell like 20 more people about how bad that was.
And so just to put an exclamation point on it, but so then when you get to, like Bill said, when you get to 4 to 6 to 8, then it's like, okay, if the station is full, you're probably only going to wait 5 minutes for it to churn and
Right.
and for you to get there. And if 1 or 2 chargers are broken, right, there's still 6 others or whatever that are working, and so that number of stalls per station growing is one of the most significant and important trends in the industry, because it just improves everything that we just talked about.
Well, I'm kind of curious. I mean, obviously software must be one of, if not the largest kind of player into this reliability thing. Because I had taken, I guess it was about a year ago, I did a road trip from Bend, Oregon down to Phoenix, Arizona. Did it in a day. Don't recommend it. And I was in Battle Mountain, Nevada, which is very middle of nowhere. And there was 4 chargers. 2 of them, one of them for sure was down, and then a second one looked like it should work, but no matter what I did, no matter there was something, even though the screen was telling me it was working, clearly it was just broken. And you go into the app and it says there's only 1 down. And in the end, obviously, I live to tell the tale, I'm here. But for those people like in that Chevy Bolt, in those kind of experiences who are new to it, I completely agree. Having more stalls there is great. And I just think, even when you're at 4, okay, you're on the second one that's failed, it starts getting a little dicey and a little nervous, even for someone who has is experienced that. And now it feels to me like the thing that is helping with this is just reliable, accurate software on the back end that's really giving a lot of these CPOs and charging providers that clear data to say, hey, this stall is malfunctioning, it needs to be replaced. I mean, is that I'd be kind of curious if both of you guys think that's probably the biggest thing, just because it just seemed like we'd see such a long, only go back a couple of years, you'd see such a long time between a station being down and it being replaced or even properly fixed. And now we're starting to see that. Obviously, as you were mentioning, like Tesla's still kind of like the gold standard for that, where they can do it like 4 to 8 hours. But it seems like a lot more are really catching up in that space.
So there's a lot to unpack in that statement, but let's start at the end there, which we started to call the mean time to repair, right? And which is a normal, hardware type metric. But from a customer perspective, how long does it take, right? We've seen charging stations that have been down for weeks, months, many months. We've got stations that we've seen in the Pacific Northwest where cable cutting is a big challenge, where I'm pretty confident that the CPO or the site host has said, I'm done. I'm not replacing the cable again if it's just going to get cut the next day. I get it. That makes perfect business sense. But we see, I told this example, I think at EBCS, where there is a Tesla charging station that is right behind where I used to work. And it was set on fire. This is in Massachusetts. So it was set on fire I don't know, back in early March, I think. And it was setting fire probably around midnight on a Monday night. Power was cut. 5 of the 8 stalls were damaged. By Thursday afternoon, people were charging again. I don't know if all 8 were replaced, but at least the 5 that were damaged, it looked like someone poured gasoline or something and set them on fire. But they didn't damage the back end infrastructure. They just damaged the stalls. So that, to me, that's the gold standard, right? That is, you're out there shutting it down, digging, replacing, and testing and validating, and they even put up one of those mobile cameras that's solar powered, right? So that's a great example of really matching what the customers are expecting from this location.
Yeah, and Chase,
that's like the top tier experience from like a hardware standpoint.
Yes,
I think what's still, in my experience using some of the other providers, what's so cool was obviously Tesla does have like just the total number of stalls. So if one goes down in that area, it's not a huge miss. But from the driver perspective in the OS, it just kind of disappears. It's offline. So you're not still being routed to this one that's either down or offline. It just, it figures out and you keep going on your road trip as if it was never there or never an issue. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say there, Loren?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, let Bill go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, well, that point was actually one of the original things that got me going to start this business about 2 years ago, which is that, is there a way to tell that a station is down when it says it's not? When it says it's up, rather, right? And so we actually worked with the original reliability, sort of the original reliability study that came out, which I still quote recently. It's now getting a little old in the tooth. It's about 3 years old, right? And this was from the Cool the Earth team in UC Berkeley, a team headed by a woman named Carleen Cullen that went out and physically tested 600 ports in the Oakland area, DC fast charging ports. And they found that some of them worked, some of them said they worked and they didn't, some of them didn't work, they said they didn't work and they obviously didn't work, and then some worked. And so we got a hold of their data and matched it up against some of our data. And we were able to sort of train an algorithm to understand what it looks like when a station says it's up and it's really not capable of holding an EV charge. We're seeing, we don't see that as much anymore. We talked about reliability going up, and that's one of the key reasons is that there's a whole bunch of different pieces of software involved. There's the software in your vehicle. There's the software in the OS running the charger itself, charging unit, and then there's the software for the payment terminal. They all have to be in sync, and when they're not, bad things happen. And so we're seeing a lot of improvements in that area, just in general, over the last 2 years.
Yeah, Chase, the software, and Bill knows the sort of the numbers by heart, I think, but in maybe it was the Charger Help study and stuff, I think, isn't software the number one cause of charger failures, or is it cellular connectivity? I can't remember which one. Do you remember?
I think it's the cell. I think at the time of where that study was done, I think it was the cellular connectivity.
Yeah, and maybe that's evolved a bit. And I know, Camille of Charger Help, she always recommends to customers to use a wired backup and stuff like that. And I know there's some innovative solutions now where they sort of, if one cellular service goes down, it reconnects to a backup one and stuff. So I think, again, you go back to what we were talking about earlier, is in the early days, it just, they were learning while they were flying, right? And and it wasn't a business yet, so it didn't make sense. Now it's starting to make sense to spend the extra money to have these backups, to have teams that monitor the software. I moderated a session, not this year at EVCS, but a year ago, on using like AI and machine learning and using like anomaly detection and stuff like that. It's still kind of early, but a lot of the companies and software providers are starting to build in intelligence to actually look for patterns before, charging hardware or things go down, right? And so they can maybe be proactive and stuff. The reality is what Bill and I and Florent experienced a couple of months ago is that dream is not quite real yet. So again, I won't mention the names, but we stopped off at a very well-known charging station in Marin County on the way back from a executive retreat, and we pulled up to a 3 fast charger plus a level 2 charger station at a supermarket, and there were 2 stalls full, and we go up to the 3rd one, and it says it's down, or I forgot what the message was on it, right? So we literally sat there in the parking lot aisle for a little bit. Florent and I went in and got sandwiches and stuff, and then I came back out and I walked up and I looked, and there was a phone number and stuff, so I pressed the button and called, got hung up on after waiting 5 minutes. Called back, then somebody answered within 4 minutes, and the guy said, "What's the problem?" I said, the charger's down, and he says, "What's the number on it?" I told him the number. A few seconds go by, "Oh, yeah, we've already fixed that station. Here, let me reboot it." And he literally rebooted the charger. I watched it go dark, come back on. It took, I think maybe less than 60 seconds. And it was working, and there was a car sitting there waiting. We'd already plugged in another one. That's why I waved the car over. But it was like, that was like this total head scratcher for us. Well, wait a minute. They knew it had been down.
Yeah.
They somehow fixed it, but didn't bring it back online, right? And so it was down. I think Bill went back and looked at the data when we got back to the office. It was down for, I think, an hour or 2 or something like that. But like, if I hadn't called, how long? It might have been down for days, right? But that's stuff that's just unacceptable, right? Like, how does that happen?
I think I know we've been kind of talking about the negative side of it, so I kind of want to pivot to talk about the things that we're optimistic about, because you're totally right. Between I guess I've shared this before, but I'll share it real briefly. I recently went to a third-party charger along the Oregon coast. Beautiful area, but there really aren't many chargers around there. And fortunately, I didn't need to charge. It just would have been nice to charge. Given where we were staying and like on our trip, we were doing something else. Like, hey, if this works, that's kind of nice. We don't have to stop later. We're already getting lunch. And I go to use the card swiper, and one, it's a 50 kilowatt charger, which, yeah, whatever. But I go to use the card swipe, and I have never had a card, and I knew this was going to happen. I have never had a card swipe work with this
provider.
I don't want to say chain, but CPO.
Yeah.
It just literally, they physically have them. I know that they were trying to add the software to make them work, and if they have ever actually done it, they're all broken. And I don't know. That just, unfortunately, is just the sad state of affairs with them. Anyways, I go to the backup, which is to download the app, which should hopefully make it work. Well, where this is on the Oregon coast, I have no cell reception. And I had previously downloaded the app, and because I got some setting on my phone, it deletes apps I don't use for a while. And here I am. I mean, in some ways, I'm getting like a 6 satisfaction out of this. Like, this is so unbelievably bad.
Yeah, but you did have the RFID card, right? The little fob.
Yeah, right. I mean that was about as pathetic and to the point that it was, that I tried just about everything, and at that point I was just like, you know what, this is pointless. I'm just going to drive away. But I can only imagine I'm far from. I just kind of think of like, okay, the poor little grandma, or just someone who's like trying this or doing this for the first time. What the hell are they going to do? And how is this system going to work? So now that we've gone through all the terrible experiences we've had and how sad we are with the industry, let's talk about some of the things that make us optimistic. And because I do think that was actually a really funny theme, talking to a lot of people coming from the EV charging summit, it seemed like a lot of people were going into it were a little kind of downtrodden. Obviously, I think some of the NEVI news and stuff had happened like the week before. But then coming out of it, there does seem to be a pretty positive feeling from a lot of people. And maybe I'm just naturally optimistic. I was going in kind of excited to be there and everything else going on. And I came out even happier out of it. But what are, like, looking at utilization and some of these other things we're starting to see, what are some of the kind of like the really positive trend lines and things that are showing like, okay, this is growing and reinforcing and rewarding those CPOs who are doing this well?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think we started off really positive, and they were saying, different players, they're improving the brand experience, reliability. We are seeing reliability go up and stuff. So I just want to be clear, we started off very.
That's true. You got to sandwich the bad news between like two good things,
but
right?
then we ended with our negative experiences. But yeah, I mean, utilization is one of the things that Bill obviously tracks and we look at a lot. And I think there are a couple of things that really stood out. One is just that in many key markets, utilization is, averaging, 25-30% on a, either a 24-hour basis or however long that particular station is open. But one of the things that we did is we sliced the data by what we either call sort of peak time or prime time charging. In this case, we sort of looked at a bell curve and stuff and picked the hours of 12 noon to 6 p.m. In this particular data set we were looking at across the largest MSAs, that sort of was when we saw the bulk of the usage. And there are markets that are like averaging north of 40% utilization during those six hours, right? And what that means is there are actually a number of charging stations in markets like San Francisco, LA, New York, Vegas, Miami, etc., where they're 80 to 100% utilized during the middle of the day, right? Like they are literally tapped out. As Bill and I talk about, and we don't yet know sort of what the magic number is. We're actually starting to work on that, but it's sort of good news, bad news for these CPOs in these markets. One is, utilization is off the chart, but you can't, if they're completely occupied in the middle of the day, you can't sell more, right? Like how do you grow? So and again, this is maybe, I don't know what, Bill, 20 or 30 markets or something like that where this 30. Is a problem. The rest of the country, it's not a problem yet, right? But in those markets, like you really have, roughly like three options. One is you use time of use rates and different things like that to try to attract more people to charge at 5 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock at night, because rates are significantly cheaper, so you get them to change their behavior. Because if everybody just goes and waits or whatever it is they're going to leave, right? It extends those a little bit of hours, so you want to move them to the lower utilized hours. B, maybe you do partnerships with fleets and rideshare companies and apartment complexes and stuff like that, where you get people to come charge in the middle of the night and things like that, and at a lower price. And thirdly is, and this is sort of Bill's favorite of the three, is you add more ports and open new stations, right? But yeah, and so this is, like 2 years ago, this was not a problem or an opportunity. Like we weren't talking about, 100% utilization, 80% utilization.
Well, I guess in those markets, are you seeing the old adage, if you build it, they will come, in that case, when they are actually that maxed out?
So not necessarily in those markets, but generally. But we also did a study with a bunch of NEVI data that we got. So Ohio leads the country in the number of NEVI stations. So it's a really good data source to look at. And so we looked at the holidays of the new NEVI stations. And it was really interesting around Thanksgiving and Christmas, New Year's of 24. where those stations were like months old, some in cases weeks old, and they saw 20% utilization during the peak travel times. So to me, that said, and Ohio is very interesting because it has 2 or 3 east-west major highways that run through it, and then 2 north and south, right? So it is, if you're going anywhere on the East Coast, generally, unless you're hugging the coast, you're going to pass through Ohio, as I did during the holidays. And those stations, for being brand new, it just saw a tremendous amount of activity. And I think that is one case where I think if you build it, they did build it, and they came, and they continue to come. So that's in, not necessarily specific urban populations. I mean, the places, because Ohio is generally, well, at least the highways are generally all in major metro areas, or at least in that region. That doesn't surprise me, right? But when we look at, in the broader sense, when we look at the big metro regions, to me, growth is the only way out. There's only so much you can do from a time of use pricing perspective, and you can incentivize a few folks.
Yep.
But it's really hard to move the needle. You really just need to increase the capability, both of the charger, put more high-powered charging. As newer cars come out, they can accept that high power at better rates, leading to shorter charging times, leading to more folks being able to move through the cycle, through the system. So to me, it's an opportunity for existing CPOs to expand their space. Again, easier said than done, much easier said than done, and an opportunity for other folks, whether they're the Sheets and the Loves and the Buckies that don't already have charging, to put more charging stations in places where they don't have to go find the land, like Walmart. Walmart just saved probably a third of the problem of landing EV charging, which is the land grab. Right? They've already got it for the most part.
Yep. And Chase, I think I think we talked about this on one of my previous appearances on the show, was the thing that really has driven utilization in these major urban markets is rideshare drivers.
And I'm sorry not to cut you up. I want to hear what you have to say, but one of the things I did want to ask you specifically about that is you're talking about time of use. And in my own anecdotal experience, I have seen time of use, literally I'll be at a charger that I am the only person at, and then it becomes 10 p.m., and it is then flooded with what appears to be mostly rideshare drivers.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you kind of like, time of use does seem to have some impact, specifically with that group that's so price sensitive for that return that they're trying to get on their rides.
Yeah, and rideshare drivers, for many of them, especially those that drive EVs and stuff, it might be their primary business, right? As opposed to the people that are like school teachers that are driving on weekends and nights and stuff like that, right? But yeah, I mean, we all three of us use Uber and Lyft when we travel and stuff like that, and it's amazed at how many are Model Ys and Model 3s and other electric vehicles. I mean, it has just exploded. Uber and Lyft have incentivized. There's these leasing rental services that have emerged and partnered. I think the drivers get a few more pennies per mile or something if they drive an EV with a green rate and all these kinds of things. So that has really taken off because these drivers who it's their business have realized, especially when gas prices are high in markets like California and certain places on the coast, that they can actually be more profitable driving an EV versus a gas car. But where this really first came onto my radar was about 9 months ago when EVgo, in one of their quarterly earnings investor presentations, said that 25% of their throughput, meaning the amount of energy dispensed in the quarter, was to one customer segment, rideshare drivers. 25%, 1/4 of their business, right, is from this tiny percentage of drivers, right? They have something like now 1.3 million members, right? but so but like a small number, small percentage of that is driving 1/4 of their business. And the analogy I like to use is somebody that was like a diamond status on Delta for many years. It's the industry is sort of, at least for a while, moving to a model like that, right? Where like the upper tier, the top tier business loyalty members of airlines, account for, like 1% of the of the customers, but like 80% of the revenue and profits and that type of thing. And we're starting to see that now with rideshare, that you talk to some of these rideshare drivers, Chase, and some of them will charge 2 or 3 times a day, 6 days a week, right? So they might be charging 15 or 20 times a week versus an average EVgo customer apparently might charge a couple times a week or something like that, right? So that that just emerged like in the last 2 years or so. And that's if you go back and we plotted the chart, you would see that's really what seems to be driving that. And the fact that we're almost about doubling the number of EVs on the road
right
now, because we're at 1.3 million, right? And so if you're at 4 million, you add 1.3 million each year, even though the headlines say we're slowing. From an actual numbers growth perspective, that's like 25% VIO growth, number of vehicles on the road in 1 year. That has also contributed. But the rideshare drivers are really like the big mover. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting because I think I may have spoken with you about this in the past as well. Like, if you look at the traditional rideshare or taxi driving business, they have their own commercial charging. And it does seem like there is kind of a bit of a business opportunity for one of these CPOs to kind of either lean into that. I know you've got like Revel, which has their own cars, and they kind of do that. But it seems like that would also alleviate a lot of this pressure you see at these fast chargers. I mean, and that seems to be where most of these negative headlines come from, because I think it was last winter when Chicago had that kind of big winter rollout, and then all these you saw the headlines of people waiting at chargers, and the vast majority of them were rideshare drivers that were just trying to use that with this. And to me, it just seems like there's a business opportunity, and there's also an experience improvement that kind of needs to be made with this optimization for who rideshare drive, where and when rideshare drivers are charging on some of these charging networks, so that the grandma who's taking that road trip across the country isn't kind of getting this horrible experience when they roll up to each charger and are waiting like 20 minutes just to even plug in.
So real quick on that, I mean, Revel is doing more than just fueling their own vehicles, right? They've opened up. I forget exactly where. Was it LA or San Francisco that they've opened up
San Francisco.
San Francisco. They've opened up a hub specifically for rideshare. BP Pulse opened up probably the largest charging station in New England, even including Tesla. I think they have 48 or something stalls in the Boston area, and that's going to primarily serve rideshare drivers, because we've seen certainly around Logan Airport, where I've spent far too much time, it's a charging desert. There's a couple of stations that more often than not are plowed in and not usable. So I think that's a great opportunity. The other quick thing to add is I read somewhere recently where Uber Green is no longer at some point going to allow hybrids. And I'll tell you, as an Uber customer, there's nothing more disappointing than going on Uber Green and getting a RAV4 hybrid. Nothing against the RAV4. I have one in my garage. But it is, it's not what the expectation is. So that may actually drive more EVs into that green space, especially if you're getting like a few cents more per mile out of it.
Yeah, and Chase, I think we've all talked about this and stuff, and there's this expectation that Uber and Lyft fund or partner or whatever at some point, right? This charging infrastructure, but that may not happen. What they may do is just work with, like Bill mentioned, BP and Revel and companies like that, and provide the data. It's sort of like look, if you'll build these things, we'll tell you where to build it, right? Because we'll because we know. When airports are the most obvious location, right? They go and they queue a while. It's a perfect thing. Go plug in, use the restroom, get a cup of coffee, check your phone, call your girlfriend, like whatever it is, for a little bit, top up and get back in and get that, that airport fare and head back into the, downtown city or whatever it is, right? And so, maybe we're going to see the BPs and the Revels and, NEVI goes and others sort of take that on with these sort of, maybe they're exclusive, right? Like maybe they're only for rideshare drivers, or maybe there's certain stalls that are dedicated or something like that. But I do think we need to see Uber and Lyft kind of step up a little bit and make sure that happens, because you're right. Like as this explodes, there's nothing worse than that as a normal driver pulling into a charging station that's got 12 Uber and Lyft drivers there, and you're like, what the hell, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it is something that'll be solving kind of a growing pain, but it just seems like it's a specific need that, like I said, traditional fueling, you have commercial fueling for businesses, so they are not interfering for the most part with travel of kind of regular citizens. And I know we have been talking a lot kind of about more urban focus with a lot of this.
Yep.
I would be kind of curious, since we got Loren, you're always kind of Mr. NEVI. With the current state of NEVI, I would be curious to kind of hear your thoughts on kind of the rural market EV adoption and just overall adoption, how that's played, or just any of these kind of trends you're seeing from that point of view, since we're kind of starting to come up on time here.
Yeah. So one of the things when we looked at the data, and there's one of my favorite charts in the report that shows, it's got the utilization percentages and sort of colors, and as you might expect, sort of the darker colors, meaning higher utilization, tend to be on sort of the coasts and things like that, and that upper Midwest, the North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, etc. are like white, right? Like they're 1%, 2%, 3% utilization, whereas California is like 25%. And there you go. So it's not surprising, right? There aren't a lot of EVs being purchased in those markets. It's very rural. People drive, 13,000 miles a year versus 8,000 miles a year in California. They do long road trips just to go to that Walmart. They drive pickups. It's not necessarily where people are going to adopt, EVs at a high level. And so the reality is infrastructure is probably, has exceeded the need and demand, if you will, right? Like that's why utilization is so low, right? If you got 4 chargers and nobody's using them, you're going to have a 1% utilization rate. But the flip to this and the negative impact of the pause of NEVI is, one of the drivers and hurdles of EV adoption is the fear that if I go on the road trip to Yellowstone, Yosemite, Wyoming, the what is it, in South Dakota, the with the presidents in the hill. I'm blanking on what
Mount Rushmore, yeah.
Mount Rushmore. Thank you. This is what happens when you get old. But yeah, I mean, there's people reading the headlines that, no chargers are being built. I can't go on a road trip. My brother-in-law has told me this. He wants to drive across Iowa, and he's heard that there's no chargers, and he might run out of, fuel, so he's not going to get an EV, right? And so even though utilization is low in these regions, they're still not there where we need them. They're not, the every 40, 50, 30, whatever miles, on the way to Yellowstone and Mountain Rushmore and things like that. So the pause of NEVI is really problematic because it means not only are these chargers not going to be building, we're not bringing jobs, we're not giving the people that live there confidence that they can go to the Walmart 70 miles away and back and charge. It's the hundreds of millions of people in America who want to go visit their grandma in Montana for Thanksgiving don't think they can, right? And that's the primary hurdle that NEVI was designed to solve. A lot of people don't understand that, but it was to fix the lack of those chargers that every 50 miles and give people confidence they can go there. So the NEVI pause is really not a good thing. And the flip to it, Chase, is that what it means is those purple states are only going to get more purple, right? Because people again, we won't mention names, but Bill and I have had conversations with several of our customers who are like, this is a fundamental pivot for them. They're like, yeah, when we can get incentives, we'll get them. But we're really now completely driven by data and where we can make the most money, which means they're not going to put them out in those northern plain states, right? Which means it's only making the matters worse. That we're truly headed towards what I'm sort of calling a charger divide or a charger utilization divide, where the CPOs are just gonna double down on those urban rideshare markets where they can make a ton of money and ignore those rural ones.
I mean, that is kind of interesting because that does seem to put obviously kind of Tesla having in my experience, probably the most universal rural exposure to charging locations as well. So that is kind of an interesting one where that is leaving. I get the argument like you're saying for it, but it leaves a lot on the table kind of to them as a national provider.
That's right.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, because I got really negative there, but to go back to sort of be positive and connect it with some of the earlier, players we talked about, though this is where, the Walmarts and the Quick Trips and those providers
For sure.
that are out in the rural areas could help solve some of that, right? And so so there is hope, but it is but fundamentally the NEVI pause is problematic and from a number of levels.
But you're right, Chase. It does put more pressure on Tesla to be that national provider, and we saw this time last year when they canned the entire charging team, right? And then we've seen them say that they're going to focus more on making existing stations larger to accommodate some of the need, but that uncertainty of exactly what they're capable of doing, I think is going to be something that we have to keep an eye on. Right? It's not an issue today, but it could be an issue in the future.
No, that's a good point, and I guess this may be a good pivot since we're talking about Tesla, is kind of the adoption of the J3400 North American charging standard and kind of rollout we're seeing with that nationally. I'm curious on both of your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, so we started counting ports, which is something that is not a lot to count right now, but we're counting the number of NACS ports that are out there. And seeing how is that going to change over time, and we're looking at IONNA, for example, when they put their stations out. Generally, they're putting them out in 60/40, 60 CCS 40 NACS. We saw BP Pulse doing 50/50. I think Walmart said they're going to do 50/50. Right. So, and the hardware that they're using allows them to quickly change their mind if they can, if they're measuring the data correctly and they see things moving in a different direction. So that is something that we're watching. We know EVgo has always had has always had that third plug on some of their Delta City 100s. That was the Tesla plug, and then yes, and then and we're seeing some folks. We're some folks in California. EVCS is another CPO that has the plugs that has a mix, and so we're seeing that number grow. We're also seeing the different hardware come out. Right, ChargePoint I think has sort of a Magic Dock-like solution for their customers, and so those are all good signs that as the vehicles come, and they will come with better charging experiences. Just from a vehicle perspective, that there will be more than just Tesla options out there.
Yeah, and Chase, just from kind of a numbers perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but I think right now it's about 10 to 1, sort of with Tesla sort of like Magic Dock capability versus all the other non-Tesla. How many? It's like it's just under about, I think, 1,000 for Tesla and about 100 for non-Tesla.
Yeah, that's new plugs per quarter, right?
Yeah, in the last quarter. So like we're still really early, and so I think what we're going to see, Chase, for a while is, I think the Lucid Gravity, I think, is the first EV that's going to be on the market with the J3400 standard, and then they're going to start to roll it out.
I think Hyundai has started rolling out some of their vehicles already with it. But you're right. It is pretty limited what vehicles are out in the market, and I know that was one of the big things Lucid was kind of mentioning with the launch of it.
Yeah, and so I think the CPOs right now are sort of saying, okay, we're just going to depend on the adapters for the moment for our tens of thousands of ports that we have out there, and then when we open new stations, that's where we're going to add the, as Bill said, 50-50, 60-40, whatever it is. But until there are, probably, 40 or 50 BEVs on the market that have, a standard J3400 port on the car, they're gonna probably not do a lot of retrofitting, right? Or they'll do it when, like in Seattle, when the cable's cut. Right, they might replace it with the
forcing function of the wrong kind,
J3400, or just like we saw with Electrify America and EVgo in the last year or two, they did a lot of rip and replace. They ripped out old hardware and replace it. So and a lot of these chargers have been in the ground for 5, 7, 10 years now, and have reached their end of life. And so we might see a lot of that sort of where it makes sense, right? If we're going to replace the hardware, let's replace the connector and stuff as well.
That makes a lot of sense, and I always thought that the rollout that a lot of people had shared kind of around how quickly the turnover was going to be to J3400 seemed optimistic at best, whether that be on the charging or the automaker side. I am kind of curious, a little tangential to that. I was talking to some of the Electric Era team, and they've been making a big, Quincy even on LinkedIn's been posting about it quite a bit lately, that Tesla is also kind of opening up their native OS to recommend highly ranked third-party chargers. I'm just kind of curious if that's come up at all or much with any of the conversations of the CPOs you work with, and any of the things that maybe are kind of going into the thought process if they're trying to be involved with that to make sure they do well and kind of get ranked high on it.
We've had a couple of conversations, and basically it's more for us to understand a little bit about what those requirements are, right? Is it this particular site has demonstrated over the last month that it is a reliable site? Is it at a CPO level? And how frequently is that data checked? Because as we talked about early on in the show here, if the charger says it's available but it can't hold a charge, the CPO says it's up, right? We don't. Drivers don't. We don't consider that up. And that was actually a long conversation I had with the ChargeX Consortium team when we were going with that a year and a half ago. And so I'm curious as to what the actual requirements are there and how they're going to be met, because I think that it should be probably more stringent than it is. Maybe we'll have a chat with Quincy and see if he can share what some of those details are. But yeah, I'm curious as to how that's going to work, right? We know that Rivian has done something somewhat similar in that they're using their fleet as a way to measure reliability from an EV charging perspective. I like that idea. I consider it a step above PlugShare, right? PlugShare is anecdotal, right? It's hit or miss, right, as to whether or not you're going to get data on any specific charger. But if you've got, a bunch of a fleet of Rivians that are visiting the top 10% of the chargers, then you're going to get some detail, but it's not going to be broad enough, right? So I'm curious as to how Tesla's going to handle that.
I remember when they announced it for Europe a long time ago, they had said that if a driver shows up and the success rate is 70% or greater, they would show it. And to me, even 70% seemed like a low bar for what should be.
That's low.
Yeah,
That's
and
low.
And admittedly, this was a few years ago, so I'm curious to see what they're. I'm hoping it's closer to 90%.
90,
but it'll be interesting to see how that is implemented.
Yeah. But Chase, and this is ultimately the sort of the vision of Paren is to look not just at the ability to successfully charge, but all the other factors that go into the decision to pick station location A versus D, right? Because as we've talked about, one of the things that's really changed in this transition to charging 2.0 is choice, right? Like we've gone from, you're driving down a highway and it's like, oh my God, there's a fast charger that I can charge at. I'm just happy to, now we have these sort of hubs, and we talked about this on a previous show, right, where it's sort of like fast food and gas stations where there's one on every corner, right? And so it's like, do we want Taco Bell, Burger King, McDonald's, or Arby's, or whatever it is, right? And it used to be there was just the McDonald's on one corner, right? So now we have optionality, and that's emerging now, which means that and Bill uses this example all the time, like where he wants to stop is quite different from where his wife wants to stop, right? She cares about safety and amenities and clean bathroom and stuff, and Bill cares more about like state of charge and price and things like that, right? And so what does a rating mean, right? I don't know about the two of you, but when my family and I go on a road trip, my first care is like good food and a clean bathroom, right? Is this a place I want to stop and hang out at for 20 to 30 to 40 minutes, right? I don't care if it costs me 50 or 55 or 60 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm not everybody. A lot of people do care about that, but if I'm spending, $40 on, 3 burrito bowls and soft drinks, and what do I care about, $1.20 difference in price? I mean, that's just me, right? But, one of the things we've talked a lot about is it's not just amenities and clean bathrooms, but that charging station at 2:00 in the afternoon could be quite safe, right? But at 11 o'clock at night, when the restaurant next door, the Subway or Taco Bell or whatever it is closed, and there's no bathroom, there's no lights, there's no humans around, it goes from being really safe to I ain't stopping, right? And so, that's why, not to pick on them, but PlugShare or whatever, these ratings kind of may not mean much at the moment that you stop, right, or want to stop. And so we really need a more real-time, comprehensive, and personalized approach to helping figure out where to stop.
Yeah, I've always kind of considered so many of these are open 24/7, and I kind of think every now and then, well, should they be? Maybe this one shouldn't be open 24/7. It's good during the day, but right now it's
sketchy
at best. Yeah, but I mean that's what I think there is a kind of there's a fun that comes out of it for some people, such as myself, when they are on they're trying to cover 1,000 miles in a day. It's like, well, this is a fun twist. But yeah, kind of speaking to it, that's not for everyone, especially if you're traveling with a family. I don't think you want to have the experience like, well, I got held up at a charging station outside of Vegas, and before
Yeah.
I knew it, great
Yeah.
story, terrible experience.
Right.
And I think with that, I do realize we've gone over time. This has been great as always. Thank you, Loren and Bill, so much for coming on today. Really great conversation, really great content. For those listening, we already have quite a few of the links in the show notes, but are there any upcoming events, or what's the best way to connect with the Paren team and learn about more what your team's offering?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to the Paren.app website, and we've got the report there. Go to the reports section. You can read and download the new Q1 report blog. We actually Bill and I are doing a webinar where we're going to walk through the highlights on Thursday, May 8th. So that's maybe probably the key takeaway. So you can actually hear us go through sort of in detail and actually see the charts as we talk to them. I don't know, Bill, do you have anything to add? Or?
No, well, we're looking again at, we did an estimate around Thanksgiving, and based on some AI tools that we're working with. And so we're going to do some similar estimates around Memorial Day, and sort of predicting the best times to charge. It's a predictive algorithm that we're working on around major holidays as we look to kind of expand and build on what we call the routing companion, right? Kind of what we just talked about is routing is getting more complex. It's not just getting you from point A to point B, but that point B has to be working. It's got to meet all of your other needs. And that's really what our main focus is. So we're continuing to kind of push that envelope and move forward. So follow us on LinkedIn. Most of your crew are probably already following Loren.
Well, great. Thank you, Bill and Loren. We'll have to have you guys on again soon, and great conversation.
Right. Thanks, Chase.
All right. Thanks, Chase.
That wraps up today's conversation with Loren McDonald and Bill Ferro from Paren. From rideshare-driven utilization to Walmart's nationwide charging strategy and the evolving metrics at Charging 2.0, this episode captured where the EV charging industry is headed and why real-time data and reliability are now non-negotiable. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to share it with one colleague or friend who's working in electrification, mobility, or infrastructure planning. And if you haven't yet, leave us a quick review. It helps others discover the show. Plus, be sure to visit gridconnections.co to learn more about Grid Connections Consulting, how we're helping startups, utilities, and agencies accelerate their electrification strategy. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the show notes to stay informed on the latest in electric vehicles, energy, and transportation. Until next week, this is the Grid Connections Podcast, signing off.